Hi, everybody. Welcome to Dive Deep. I'm Shelby Cornett, and I'm the ministry assistant at Cambridge City Christian Church, and this is Danny.
Hey, Shelby.
Hi.
I just want to tell everybody out there in Dive Deep land.
Great.
I don't know. Is that what we could say?
Yeah.
That Shelby is totally committed to the cause today. She's not feeling very well. So she wants to make sure that you get your dive deep, even though she feels like a wreck right now.
I do feel like a wreck. But we didn't do it last week because it snowed.
Yeah.
So I felt like we had to do it this week.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. Well,
Pushing
I
through.
give you credit,
Thank
Shelby.
you.
I won't. I guess that means I have to be nice today, though.
Yeah, I'll try to be nice too.
Yeah.
I almost don't have the energy to be mean today.
If you're mean to me, I won't fight back today because I feel bad for you.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. So I don't know. That might mean our podcast is kind of boring today. I don't know,
Sorry.
So you're sick, and I'm not going to pick on you, and you're not going to pick on me. Yeah, it might.
Yeah.
But we're talking the word.
We're
of God,
losing
though.
views as we.
We're talking the word of God, which is always good. So.
Yeah.
All right. So that's what we'll do.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And this week was the Mark series.
Yes.
That's until April, right?
Yeah,
so we've got
all the way until the last day is on Easter. That's when
Okay.
we end the series is on Easter.
Okay.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And this week was what it takes to follow.
Yeah, what it takes to follow. So what was your thoughts? This week's sermon, before you do that, I mean, this week's sermon was definitely a very pointed, very direct sermon. I mean, I was talking with my wife about it the other day, and you know, she asked me kind of, and well, we talked about it in our meeting yesterday about why I was sitting and on it, and I told her part of it was I was a little bit tired.
Yeah.
But part of it was just I knew it was a very serious kind of sit down, talk together kind of message because
Not an exciting jump around, walk around the
yeah,
stage kind of thing.
Yeah, it was definitely much more challenging. Admonishing is another word I would probably use. I mean, it was a very serious message this week. Yeah, we talked about how many of us have a blurry Jesus. Like we see Jesus as maybe our Savior, but not as much about him being our Lord. And really, if you look at the book of Mark, and we may get into this, but the book of Mark kind of shifts in this chapter. So we see this story with Jesus, right? And the story is when he was, I'm working on this week's sermon, so sometimes my mind kind of goes
Are you trying to
blank.
figure out what he did this week?
Well, yeah, I mean let me see your notes here because I mean he was let's see. Oh yeah, okay, now I know. I just needed one thing to kind of get my mind going again. Sorry. No, it was about the great confession of Peter. And if you remember in the story, he's asking, okay, what does everybody else think about me? And then Peter says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. I mean, actually, in the book of Mark, it says you are the Christ. It doesn't say the Son of the living God. In the book of Matthew, it has a longer statement in a parallel passage there in Matthew. But anyway, the book hinges on that statement because now what we're going to see moving forward is more of the Jesus is Lord part, not just that Jesus came to save us, but Jesus also came to, and this is where it gets hard. He came to enslave us in a sense, and I mentioned Sunday that one of Paul's favorite words was the Greek word doulos, which means slave or servant. That's how he referred to Jesus. So we see the Messiah, and now we see we've been set free from the world, but we should be enslaved to God's truth. So that's where we see the shift. And in Mark 9:1 that we ended the passage with this week, it talks about Jesus referring to the kingdom and that some would see it before they die.
Yeah.
So that's where you're seeing this hinge statement. So anyway, it was a very I felt like a very powerful and challenging message for us to think about how do we see Jesus. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. And I'll just talk about my notes, I guess.
Yeah, go ahead.
'Cause
Yeah.
I didn't have a whole lot of notes,
Mm-hmm.
but I liked the story when he gives sight to the blind man,
Mm-hmm.
and it said that things were blurry at first, and then he did
Mhm.
something else, and it became
Yeah.
clear. I
Yeah.
thought that's like how our faith and understanding works a lot of the time.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
all at once.
Yeah, most people don't have
And-
the quote unquote come to Jesus moment.
Right.
It's really a come to Jesus,
Marathon.
marathon or life, right? I mean, all of us are, the vision is slowly, hopefully as we grow in our faith, slowly getting better.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and that's why when I was looking at these passages back, it was back in the summer, about how I was going to do this series, I did kind of contemplate having that section of the blind man in the previous sermon because it connects, in some ways it does connect better with the stories that come just before. But then it occurred to me that all of these stories had some connection with either blindness or not being able to hear.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this story then kind of blends into Peter's great confession really well.
Yeah.
And exactly for the reason you just said.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because our vision, it took some time for Peter to get there, and it takes time for
Right.
us.
And I also thought when we said, like, it was Peter's great confession,
Mm-hmm.
and, like, before I just thought, yeah, he confessed that Jesus is who he is, really.
Mhm.
And I was like, but that's easy for me because I know that.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time,
yeah.
that was a completely different situation.
Well, yeah, and not only that, like the cultural context was way different. I mean, even though in our country here in the United States today, you could argue that we're kind of post-Christian, where there's the church and Christ is not held up in as high regard as he was 50 years ago. There's still a cultural context here of people knowing who Jesus is.
Right.
Now, they may not agree with that assumption, but they kind of know. In Peter's context, calling Jesus the Messiah would be like, me saying somebody's an alien or something. I mean, it's like people would just be like, what is wrong with you?
It was like a huge thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was a huge step for him to make. And I thought it was interesting that Jesus started out the conversation by asking him, well, who does everybody else think I am? It's kind of, he was getting them to think a little bit.
Right.
Like, and they said, well, some think you're a prophet, and others think that you're a teacher, and, other thinks you're Elijah or and then he says, okay, now you've heard all these people. Because remember, they were in groups. They were around thousands of people. There are all these miracles and all the teaching, Jesus being on, the Sea of Galilee. And now he's like, okay, who do you think that I am? You've heard what everybody else thinks. I want to know what you think. And that's when Peter, in his brashness, which that's something I love about Peter, but it's also something that got him in trouble from time to time.
Right.
He said, "You are the Christ, Son of the living God." Yeah, pretty powerful moment.
Yeah, it was.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last thing I wanted to say was we talked about the word anointed,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and I kind of forgot what we said Sunday, so
Yeah.
I looked it up,
Yeah.
and it said to rub with oil.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's all. So I'm,
So they didn't help you out a whole
no,
lot.
I
huh?
want to go over that word again.
Yeah. So yeah, on Sunday I talked about, so when we read the Bible, we hear a couple of terms that mean the same thing. But because they're different terms, we kind of think, okay, do they mean something? We hear the word Messiah, which comes from the Jewish word Messias, okay, which is, well, let me rephrase that. That's not correct. Messias is the Greek transliteration of Messiah for all those
Okay.
Greek. Do you know what a transliteration is?
No.
I didn't think so. So what most people don't. What a transliteration is so I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it. So, okay, I've got the word. Let's just use the word Messiah. Okay. There's a Hebrew word which I don't remember what the Hebrew word is. I don't know much Hebrew. So, but what it did was in the scriptures, it'll take that word, translate it into the Hebrew, or into the Greek, and then translated into the English. So it's like,
It's a translation of a translation.
yeah, well, it's more of it's not really a translation. It's a pronunciation. So like,
Okay.
if you were to say, okay, so the Greek language, because the alphabet is so different than ours, we in English have to write it out. So when we think of Messiah, we would say Messiah. Well, in the Greek, it's Messias, and it would use different letters. So you have mu, epsilon, sigma, yoda,
Okay.
alpha, eta. So I mean, you've got it's different letters. So we have to kind
Right.
of it's to pronounce it.
Right.
Okay. So you have Messiah and Christ. Christos is a pure Greek word. Messiah is really a transliteration of the
Okay.
Hebrew word, okay, or pronunciation of the Hebrew word. So it's, but they're the same thing. They're
Okay.
the same thing. Is in essence what I'm saying, and they mean anointed. Like going back to what you said, anointed. See, only people who were kings or prophets in the Old Testament were anointed. So when
Okay.
a person heard when Peter said, "You are the Christ," like everybody's ears would have perked up. They'd be like, "He's speaking of a prophet or a king." So there's much more wrapped up in that word than maybe we think.
So it's not just.
Yeah. Prophet, priest, king, it's kind of all wrapped up into that word, that he's anointed.
So it has nothing
So-
to do with rubbing oil on someone.
Well, I mean, it does, but you know, it wasn't like he was going up to Jesus right after he said it and anointing
Right.
him. But there's this connotation to it
Okay.
of this anointedness.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Kinda.
So what were you still kind of hazy at there on that?
I mean, I think I get it.
Yeah.
An anointed one is someone like
Mm-hmm.
lifted up of high regard.
A high regard, maybe at a higher, you know, they've been endowed with something beyond what a typical person would be endowed with. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. It
Yep.
just confused me when I Googled it.
No, I'm glad you asked it because there's a lot to it. And one of the things, and the reason I brought it up Sunday, and believe me, we could talk more about it, but one of the reasons I brought it up is because we read the word so often. Like when you look throughout the Bible, you run into the word Christ a lot, Messiah a lot, you know, Lord even. We run into
Right.
that a lot. And we just kind of been like, okay, yeah, that's the title of Jesus, and we move on. We don't think about what it actually means.
Yeah.
And it's because, again, we have a cultural kind of foundation that's there where we kind of already know to some degree what it means. But for somebody in Jesus' time, these terms were loaded. And to call Jesus a Christ, a Messiah,
Right.
that's like crazy
Yeah.
talk almost. You know, they would have thought that was crazy talk. So for Peter to say it, it was that's why it's called the Great Confession. Not necessarily because, not necessarily because it was something that, I mean, in our time, I mean, it's always special to call Jesus the Christ, but in that time, it just had a whole different feel to it.
Right.
You know, so
Right.
yeah. Now there was something else. You must not have this in your notes. Something else that was really important that kind of fit into this message. We talked about what happened to Peter after he made the confession.
He
Do you remember?
he was worried about himself.
What did
And
Jesus say?
Jesus said, "Get behind me." He got in trouble by Jesus.
Well, yeah, but something happened before that.
What did he do?
So Jesus.
Oh, he rebuked Jesus.
He rebuked Jesus. I can't believe you didn't write that down.
I did.
Because that would have been.
did.
I thought that might be like a big point today.
Oh,
Because
I highlighted the
could
wrong
you
stuff.
imagine that?
Yeah.
What
no-
if Jackson, your son, what if Jackson took you to, I don't know, the kitchen after you did something and rebuked you?
He'd get in trouble.
And we're talking, a much lower level of human relationships.
Right.
I mean, here in this situation, we have a lowly human being rebuking God
Yeah.
himself.
Yeah,
I
that's
mean, it's
bad.
crazy, isn't it? And again, that's where Peter's brashness gets him into trouble. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, moments earlier, he's saying, "You're the Christ, you're the Messiah, you're the anointed one." So he's brash in that moment, and then
Mhm.
he's brash because the reason he was brash is Jesus said that he was going to die,
Mm-hmm.
that he was going to suffer. Peter didn't want nothing to do with dying and suffering.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't. That's not his idea of a Christ.
Yeah.
And so then he rebukes Jesus for saying, "No, you got this one wrong, mister." And
Yeah.
and so then Jesus says those what's he
Be
said?
like, get behind me, Satan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You ever said that to anybody before? Get behind me, Satan.
No.
I've said it facetiously.
gonna
before.
say.
Yeah, I've said it kind of joking before.
I could say
but-
it sarcastically.
Yeah, but like Jesus was like, this is one of those moments, and we're going to see it again here in a few weeks as we go through the
Mhm.
book of Mark when Jesus goes into the temple and cleanses the temple, where Jesus has righteous anger.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's a question of, is it ever okay to be angry? And the answer is yes,
Mm-hmm.
but it has to be for the right reasons.
Right.
Usually we're angry
Justified
because
anger.
we're selfish or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it has to be in pursuit of justice, not
Yeah.
in pursuit of selfishness, which usually is why we get angry, is because we want to, we're selfish. So, yeah, it's a very, very interesting interaction there.
Yeah.
You know, like one time he's probably like, "Good job, Peter, for making this confession." The next minute he's like, "Get behind me, Satan." I mean, this was like
drastic.
This was a crazy conversation that they had
Yeah.
that day.
So all this happened like at the same time, pretty much.
Yeah, it seems like it. It seems like it all happened. It may not have been, within, like when you read the text, it feels like it's like boom, boom, boom.
Right.
It could have been, more minutes or maybe hours, but it was within the same short period of time.
Right.
Yeah. Most likely.
Wow.
I tend to think it probably was boom, boom, boom. But
Mhm.
sometimes when you read through the book of Mark, sometimes things kind of get spread out a little bit. I know we're talking about the Transfiguration this week.
Mhm.
If you read the story of the Transfiguration at first, it kind of sounds like it just happened, boom, 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 and that Jesus talks with, we're going to talk more about it next week, but Elijah and Moses, that Jesus talks with them real quick. And I don't think that it happened that way. I think that they actually talked for quite a while.
Mhm.
So we have to be a little bit careful in
Right.
thinking that it's boom,
The
boom, boom.
timeline.
Yeah, but nonetheless, it was within a reasonable amount of time and
Yeah.
closeness. So, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is an interesting story. We've run into a lot of these.
I've really liked doing this series.
Yeah, and I'm starting to think about, for next year, like what I think I'm just going to do another book again next year, but I'm not sure what yet. So those of you watching,
Yeah, I like doing that.
I'm going to give you first dibs. If you watch Dive Deep, I want to know,
There you go.
like what would
What
be a
book should
great
we do?
book should we go through? Give me some ideas.
Mhm.
Can't guarantee that's what I'm going to do. I want to make sure I say that, but I'm definitely open to some ideas for next year.
Mhm.
I'm kind of leaning maybe more toward like Old Testament.
Yeah.
Because that's generally what I do is go back and forth. So I don't know. Maybe you could think about it too and come up
Okay.
with an idea. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yep.
All right. So next week is what?
We're talking about the Transfiguration
Oh, yeah.
of Jesus. Yeah, we actually did a sermon about a year or two ago on the
Mhm.
Transfiguration. So we're kind of circling back to
Mhm.
it because that's what's next in the book of Mark. And we're going to talk about how do we so last week Peter made the confession.
Mm-hmm.
How have we become too familiar with Jesus? Have we become too comfortable?
Mm-hmm.
That we're going to kind of dive into some of that. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yep.
All right. So next week we'll talk about the Transfiguration as we go through the book of Mark. And I think that's it.
Hope you get feeling better.
Yeah, me too. Thanks. We'll see you next week.